thank you so much for being on the show. It's great to have you.
Great to be here.
So this is a conversation I've been really excited to have with you because you're doing the thing that so many people in the hotel industry have been, I guess, air quote, worried about for a little while now. And that's this like kind of, if I can call it a hybrid hotel, intersection between traditional hotel and short-term rental property and all of that. So I want to dive into that really deep with you today. But before getting too deep into this, maybe just tell everybody a little bit about yourself. What's your connection to the industry and how did Sextant Stays get started?
Sure. So my name is Andreas King-Geovanis. Sextant is a next generation hospitality brand headquartered in Miami. And I started the same way a lot of people did, just with one property and a lot of ambition. The first 3 years of Sextant were totally bootstrapped. So I was the housekeeper, the concierge, the accountant, for better or for worse. And it really gave me a unique perspective, not just on each role, but having a focus on profitability, sustainability, and really building something that was going to be long lasting.
Yeah, and so graduating from that initial short-term rental host role into something that has scaled so much and relatively quickly. How did you make that transition? What was the spark that made that thing get going?
I would say really focusing not just on kind of one-off condos or condo hotels or single-family homes, but really having this vision of entire buildings. When you control the entire building, it gives you total creative control. So you can have your branding on the exterior. You can hire your own W-2 employees. So that means when the guest first arrives, that valet is someone who understands the company, the culture, the mission, housekeeping, maintenance, being able to bring all of that internally. It means that we can renovate common areas. We can get a liquor license for our property like we did in New Orleans. So that ultimately was the more scalable road to go down. The second piece was I just didn't want to deal with the friction that comes with having long-term and short-term combined. We think that is an inferior guest experience, and honestly, it's just more stressful and it's operationally taxing.
Yeah. You just mentioned a few things that I know are going to get a few people's ears to perk up a little bit. Liquor license, valet, W-2 staff. This is looking very much like a typical hotel, but it isn't in a few different ways. So can you outline a little bit the business model here? What is it that you guys are doing, and how are you threading the needle between the kind of that typical short-term rental and typical hotel?
Sure. So I think a lot of people in our space are trying to solve this problem where you have the inconsistency of an Airbnb. Your host could have weird quirks. They could be overly invasive. The property isn't standardized. Cleanliness is all over the map. And that's why people end up choosing hotels. It's because they know exactly what they're going to get when they walk into a Marriott Courtyard in Miami or in, Orange Beach. Resort market, urban market doesn't really matter. You know exactly what you're going to expect. And so our mission is to take the best of both of those asset classes and combine them. So that means having the space, the comfort, and the value that you would get with an Airbnb and combining it with the professionalism, the amenities, and the consistency of that hotel product.
Yeah, and doing it at scale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. With a hotel permit too, which is an important detail.
That's a really interesting model. I mean, from the guest's perspective, do they know that they're like, I mean, obviously you've stayed at hotels. You kind of know what it's like when you walk into a property, whether it's a high end or a select service property. And there's a certain expectation of staffing, certain positions in the property, certain expectation of different amenities around the property. If you were to just if the layman was to look at staying at one of your properties versus booking at a hotel down the street, would they be able to
Hmm.
tell the difference?
I think they would. So everything that we do is about reimagining traditional hotel operations and cost structure. So when you look at a hotel, you might have two people sitting behind the front desk, a separate concierge desk, an F&B component. We want to have all of those things, but we're doing it in a more tech-enabled way. So I'll give you a specific example. When you look at the front desk, you have this one person sitting there 90% of the time, just not really doing a whole lot. There's this big rush of check in and check out, maybe printing out a couple of reports, but most of the time they're just answering questions and making key cards. So that wasn't really an efficient use of the hotel's time to staff that position in that way. But at the same time, they're giving the guests something that is so important, which is 24/7 front desk. People don't want to call a 1-800 number. They don't want to download a mobile app that they're going to use once. They want to be able to walk downstairs, talk to a person face to face in real time, and have their issue resolved. So our innovative solution to this problem was to say, these people aren't doing anything physical. They're behind a computer. They are putting in a maintenance ticket, printing out a receipt or emailing a receipt, putting in an extension or some type of modification of the reservation. All of this is done behind a computer. So our thought process was, well, why would that computer have to be behind that front desk? Why couldn't it be halfway around the world? So we partnered with Double Robotics, which has this telepresence technology where you can interact with someone face to face in real time, just like we are now over a Zoom conference. But the robot physically can move around. And what that allowed us to do is take advantage of a labor arbitrage in the Philippines, where we can find incredibly hardworking, knowledgeable people who are fluent in English. You wouldn't even know that they were outside of the U.S., and get them to fulfill that traditional front desk role. So you can walk into any of our full buildings and ask for the best Italian restaurant in the neighborhood. What floor is the gym on? What are the hours? Can you extend my reservation? And we can do all of that. And then for the key card component, we got rid of all locks that had key cards and switched to your typical smart lock. So that resolved the key card issue. And what that allowed us to do is still give the customer that 24/7 front desk experience, but at 1/6 the cost.
Yeah. This is, we've been talking for a little while now, leading up into the pandemic, but certainly since hotels have been coming out, about how to deal with the staffing challenges in the industry right now. And it's all, even in good times, it's hard to find people to work in hotels. And there's always been this, like, this sort of thought, I think, just sort of back here in the back of everyone's mind about, like, how are we going to not only just deal with these staffing issues, but when is automation and some of these other telepresence options out there, when are they going to make their way into hotels? And to see it happening in real time somewhere, I mean, you guys really could be paving the way for maybe a tidal wave of this to make its way into hotels, and not necessarily out of a desire to want to go that way, but necessity just because of the lack of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever we're looking at traditional hotel operations, whether it's that front desk or F&B, we're thinking about, how do we leverage technology to provide the same experience, but at a fraction of the price. So we did something similar with F&B, where we put a bar in the lobby. We got a liquor license, but instead of having a bartender, we just put one of those automated wine dispensers, something you might see in a restaurant or an airport lounge. And that was really our answer to kind of creating that same energy, the same atmosphere, but again, without having to pay for a bartender. And that telepresence virtual concierge can actually check your ID to make sure that you're legally allowed to buy that alcohol.
Oh, wow. And then just going a little bit deeper into the building, then when it comes to housekeeping and turning rooms and linen and maintenance and all that, what is just a quick summary? What does the back of house look like?
Yeah, so unfortunately, no robots yet. Our our vision has really been to attract the best talent by paying the most. A happy employee is a productive employee. And we thought that we had to control the guest experience not just by controlling the building, but having every single employee aligned with the mission of the company and really to give them individual KPIs. So let's take housekeeping, for instance. We operate very similarly to a traditional hotel, except we're not using any temp agencies. Instead of paying a temp agency $20 an hour, and they in turn pay the housekeeper $10 an hour, we're paying that housekeeper our $15 an hour minimum wage.
Mhm.
So not only are we saving money, but that housekeeper is simultaneously making more money. Um, the second part is having these individual KPIs where when we have a guest leave a review on Airbnb or Booking.com, there are subscores that relate just to cleanliness. And we're able to accumulate all those subscores and give housekeepers individual feedback and scores and say, hey, you cleaned an average of 4.8 out of 5 last month, and here are the three best reviews, and here are three reviews where it showed maybe there's a little bit more room for improvement. And what this does is it gives people upward mobility. So you can start at Sexton as a housekeeper. When you average 4.8 for 6 months, you can become an inspector, then a housekeeping supervisor, and then we've had people even cross over entire departments. So you can go from housekeeping to front desk, and then from front desk to a building manager, and then a city manager. So when you build employees up and everyone is surrounded by these success stories of people who immigrated to the US, where before even coming to Sextant, they made $1 a day. Now they're making $15 an hour. And then to end the year making 70, $80,000 as a city manager, it's incredibly powerful. I mean, you see these people buy their first home, buy their first car, send their kid to college. That's what really motivates employees.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, I had that experience myself in hotels where I was able to bounce around and try different things and work in different departments and sort of work my way initially laterally across and then start to make my way up the ladder. And I only bring that up because there's so many parallels again to what you're talking about, to people's individual experiences in the hotel industry where they've done the same thing. And the difference might be that those individual KPIs that you're talking about maybe aren't as administered so specifically to each individual employee within a hotel.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. A lot of properties or a lot of companies have moved to the NPS rating model, right? Where you're just trying to see if people would recommend you. And there's a lot of science behind, whether or not that equates to a certain level of business success. And they tend to be moving away from those really long form feedback calls from all these, JD Power and all the other rating agencies. But threading, again, I use this term again, we're kind of threading the needle and finding that space where you just get relevant feedback that is going to tell you whether or not the guests are enjoying their time there, but you can also have the discipline and the diligence to pull out relevant information and apply it to how the employee is performing. And then you use that data to reward them for good behavior and in a meaningful way, not just a Starbucks gift card. Then
Exactly.
or choose your gift card. That's going to create powerful, not just that's a retention recruitment strategy, but also for like when it comes to like buy into the culture. Right?
Absolutely. I think the issue is with some of these third-party agencies is there's no recognition. You can do a great job or a terrible job. It doesn't matter. At 4 p.m., you're done for the day. And to your point, the incentives are these small spot bonuses, which we still do, but nothing is more frustrating than having promotions kind of be random. Maybe the housekeeping supervisor just happens to see that you did a great job that day, but you hadn't done a great job the last 3 months. And someone gets promoted ahead of you who maybe shouldn't have. And that's incredibly demoralizing. So it's not just about upward mobility, but it's about transparency, predictability, and fairness. And you need those data driven decisions to be able to do that.
Yeah, merit-based more than anything. Yeah. Um, with a mix of remote workers and on-site, on-property workers, I would think that it's very important to have a well-defined service philosophy and a way to measure it. If you had to describe what the company service philosophy is and how it came to be, how would you do it?
Sure. I would say we have 7 core values. I won't list them all, but on the most basic level, it's empathy. We have to be able to relate not just to our coworkers, but to the guest, to investors, to owner partners. It really comes down to that. And it's very easy to have a great culture when times are easy. But culture is really what you do in your darkest, most dire moment. And so for us, that was obviously the second week of March 2020 when Trump issued the European travel ban and bookings just fell off a cliff. And we really stuck to what made the company great. And we said, look, we are going to pay all of our rents on April 1st. And we aren't going to furlough people. We are going to figure out how do we pivot to this new long-term model or midterm model. There's demand people coming from New York or Boston or San Francisco, the areas that were hit hardest initially. Traveling nurses, student housing. A lot of students couldn't go back. They couldn't leave the U.S. So it really came down to adaptability and empathy. But if I were to choose one word, it would be empathy.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how to create and how to maintain high level service delivery, which is what a lot of this is about. Service delivery can happen in many different ways, and it means different things to different people. And that's the tricky part about it, is that people grade great service in many different ways. If I was checking in and I didn't want to talk to anybody and I had to stand there through a 5-minute spiel from somebody who had to hit all of these brand standards before I got my key, like, I would get annoyed and I might not think that that's great service, versus someone who does want to have that conversation when they're arriving, and the front desk person is just very short and gives them what they need and then moves on. It's very transactional. It's the same thing. But in my experience, the ability to stay or to have more of a hip to hip interaction with somebody when they arrive in a traditional hotel sense is a much easier way to create an emotional connection with somebody and be able to, like, kind of read their body language and sort of know how to tailor your delivery. Because it's a long-winded way of saying there's different ways to deliver high touch service. Traditionally in our hotel world, that's always been face to face, hip to hip.
Yeah,
How do you do that when you start integrating more technology?
sure. I think our perspective on this is you can't go all the way on the other side of the spectrum and just say everything's going to be robots, totally automated behind computer screens. But we have to still do it in a cost effective way. So for us, that has actually been kind of hybridizing some positions. So we've done that with valet. When you think about valet, they can be incredibly multifaceted. They could be front desk, they could be overnight security. It's someone who has to be on the property 24/7. But just like the front desk, a lot of times they're just kind of sitting there waiting for a customer to come by with their car. So valet is incredibly important to us because that is really the first impression. So first person you see at the property, how they greet you, how they open the door, do they make eye contact, how do they welcome you? And that is kind of this new approach where we don't call them valet anymore. We call them hospitality agents. And that person has been cross-trained for overnight security. They know how to make a reservation in the computer. So I think really we can still have that human element 24/7 at every single property, but it needs to be a revenue generating position. So we've had a lot of success with that in valet.
Yeah. The revenue generation piece, and I skipped over this at the beginning in the interest of keeping it a well formatted show, but I'm going to jump around a little bit here.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you walk into the owner of a building, when you walk into their office, you set a meeting with them, and you say, "Hey, we're Sextant Stays, and this is what we do, and we want to take over your entire building, and we want to run it this way." How do you? How, so many questions. How do you approach that conversation, and what are some of the hurdles that you might run into? Because again, and I'm going to tie this back to sort of the traditional hotel world. If you're working for a management company in a hotel space, almost guaranteed somebody else owns that building. Now that building has always been a hotel, and they've made the decision whether or not they want to run it as a hotel on their own, or that they want to go and hire a third-party management company to take care of that for them. But it's still a hotel, and everybody knows it's a hotel. How do you go into somebody who owns effectively an apartment building to say, "Hey, this may not be the best use of your building. Why don't you try doing it this way?"
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everybody agrees that COVID fundamentally changed the way we live, work, and travel. And whether you look at it as transient 3 or 4 night stays, or kind of this new segment of traveler that's evolved to who wants to stay for one month to 6 months, we kind of see this blur of what's housing, what's hotel, what's Airbnb. And we feel like we can create a product that is superior to anything else, and that it could be all three of those segments if it wanted to be. And we kind of see this as this new housing on demand, so to speak. So we explain to landlords and say, look, everything's changed. Housing is on demand. It needs to be flexible. You need to be able to stay there comfortably and affordably, whether it's one night, 1 month, or 1 year. And that's what our product does. As far as the sales pitch, we can always pivot back to our performance during COVID. Again, no lease terminations, no missed payments, no employee layoffs. The same thing was true with Hurricane Ida, the Category 4 hurricane that just directly hit New Orleans on August 30th. Our rent went out September 1st. So we've always been there, even though we're not as big of a name and we don't have the same balance sheet as some competitors or a big company like Marriott. In a lot of ways, we're more sustainable and more reliable.
In the hotel world, there's very well-defined target customers, and depending on the property and where it's located, it will be a different mix of effectively the same group of people. Your style of hotel and where you're located just might dictate where that mix ends up. Who's your target customer, and how do you define it?
Yeah, great question. We have a distinct focus on group travel. That could be families, or it could just be a group of friends. And what's particularly interesting when you get into this segment is it doesn't just have to be traditional families. It could be the family you had in high school. So it's all of these different groups, but generally group travel, leisure. That's just a product of the markets that we're in. And we like this focus on group travel in particular because there just isn't really a great product for it. If you were to go and book a trip with seven of your high school or college buddies, um, it would be a totally different experience to stay in five or six hotel rooms. There wouldn't be any common areas. There wouldn't be this interaction. You wouldn't have a living room or a kitchen. And ultimately, you couldn't really create memories around the space. That's what we're doing. We're not selling rooms as much as we are selling memories.
I think there's some hotel people that are listening right now to hear you say that you're one of your primary target customers is the group market, which is a massive part of a typical hotel demographic, target demographic. Having always thought that it was the leisure traveler that was more at risk, or the leisure market that it was a little bit more at risk for their hotel, but hearing that there's opportunity out there for group people to stay in, I'm going to use short-term rental as a catch-all, is probably a little maybe a little terrifying, actually, because I think many may have thought like, oh, we can deal with a little bit of loss of leisure traveler because that's seasonal, and we can make it up in other ways. But if you guys are going after group travelers during group travel seasons, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I think there's kind of this interesting view where if you looked at before COVID, if you asked Marriott who their biggest threat was, they might have said Hilton. Maybe if they were visionary, they would say Airbnb. We think it turned out to be Zoom, of all things. So when it comes to kind of are we a competitor to hotels, I think we're alternate. Sure, sometimes people are going to choose us over a Marriott, but we certainly aren't the biggest threat. The biggest threat is how people have changed. It's remote work. It's these new travel patterns, these new trends, and the technologies that make those trends possible.
I think that's a really good point. You're not necessarily trying to do a land grab on hotels. You're just meeting customers where they are today, and it's hotels that need to
Exactly.
evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had an interesting story, though, just speaking of the Marriott thing in our intro call about getting a group referred to you guys. Would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, sure. So we knew that there was going to be some opportunity with Hurricane Ida. There are just a lot of first responders, utility companies that needed housing, and we had a great product because we have the kitchen, the in-unit washer dryer, the living room, so you can stay comfortably for the 2 months that most of those people were staying there. And we are partnered with Marriott, so we're on Marriott Homes and Villas. You can redeem your Bonvoy points at any of our properties. And Marriott called us and said, "Hey, we have this lead with this Fortune 100 utility company," and they specifically requested apartment hotel product or service department product. And we were able to strike a deal with them. It was very large. Marriott's commission was six figures, and it was a win-win. So I think the winners of the hotel space are going to be the people who have really embraced this new segment and leaned into it. And you've seen some hotels like Four Seasons or Conrad where they do have condo hotel product. It's not totally totally novel. This has been around for a very long time, but Marriott was really the first one to really lean into it and not just come in as an operator, but a platform.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I can see, my wheels are spinning right now. If you bring in a hotel salesperson who's got those connections, within the industry, I mean, you could totally see where they may just start being able to peel just, a handful of rooms off periodically and send them into, to Sextant or, the like. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, if I were a traditional hotel, I would start thinking about adding a kitchenette, something as simple as that, or maybe just a connecting door to start if they don't have that already. They have the zoning, they have the real estate, and it's really just a matter of calculating how long is it going to take if we shut down a few floors in the hotel to renovate? Is it worth it to kind of A/B test one floor against another? And I think the sooner hoteliers start having the conversations like that, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah. How do you tackle the direct booking puzzle?
Sure. So I think the most obvious thing is having the lowest price on your direct site. That's by far the strongest value proposition. Um, Second is really leaning into Google. So we kind of see Google as this great equalizer where they're able to display rates across several platforms, whether it's Vrbo, Booking.com, or our own site. And when travelers are searching and they're looking at rate comparison, being priced 10 to 15% lower is extremely compelling. And we're still netting more because that's roughly the blended commission when you're partnering with those OTAs. So we do want to be in charge of our own destiny. It was very painful when Airbnb rolled out their extenuating circumstances policy, where they just refunded everybody carte blanche. The second half of March in 2020, we had over $1 million leave our bank account. And even before that, we knew that it wasn't a great long-term strategy to be so reliant on those OTAs. So every commission we pay, we see that as money that could have been used to build our brand and win that customer over to our direct site.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this interesting idea that was brought to me, and it was blindingly obvious when it was brought up. And I was so annoyed at myself that I hadn't thought of it sooner. But the idea of using OTAs as a search engine for your property in the hotel world.
Mm-hmm.
So, a certain percentage of people, once they go to, say, Expedia, they find the hotel that they want to go to, and then they will go to that hotel's website directly to learn more about it. And that's your opportunity to capture people.
Yeah.
I see this, this is effectively exactly the same thing. You have show up on, your OTA, your STR OTA site, but having a really well built out site that people can go to learn more about the company. And then that's where you hook them.
Absolutely. And in the event that the OTA does win, maybe they're not as sensitive to price and they just like Expedia, they have loyalty, whatever it is. The OTA can win the customer the first time. They should not win the customer the second time. So you need to make sure you're doing a great job letting them know about your brand, collecting that email address, that phone number, and making sure that you get them the second time.
Talking a lot like a hotel manager, aren't you, Andreas? Yeah, no, it's true. There's just so many parallels between the two worlds. What's next for Sextant Stays?
Great question. So I think a very interesting segment is 30-day plus. And this really kind of came up by chance, just being in Miami, which was kind of one of the stronger urban markets. A lot of people came in from New York and California, and were staying here for a few months at a time because we didn't have as many restrictions, and you could work anywhere in the world. You're untethered from that physical corporate headquarters, so why not come down to Miami and enjoy yourself? And so we started getting our nightly rate for these 3 or 4 month bookings. And then we even saw people extend and say, you know what, I want to stay for 6 months and 1 day, because Florida has very advantageous tax climate where there's no personal income tax. So even though they're paying this high rate, a lot of these New Yorkers were actually still saving money just because they were able to be a Florida resident. And so we kind of see housing shifting, where it has to be on demand. It could be for 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months and 1 day. And when you look at Airbnb, it's not really a great tool for that. There isn't always 3 months of vacancy if you're priced correctly, at least. Yeah. Most people can't afford to pay that nightly rate. And then the place isn't really designed for leisure. or sorry, is designed exclusively for leisure. It's not designed for someone who's going to live there full time, where you have a desk and two monitors and fast internet. That's not really a big component for your average tourist who's coming to Miami for 3 nights over the weekend. Um, at the same time, we look at the MLS as another platform, the software that realtors use, the platform that realtors use. Um, it's so much friction. You can't rent a place unfurnished and then buy furniture for 3 months. A lot of HOAs don't allow you to stay for less than 12 months, anyways. And realtors don't want to do all this work for a $200 commission. So we kind of look at the existing platforms as Airbnb is great for transient, the MLS is great for annual rentals, but there's this new segment of travelers who need to stay for a few months at a time, and nobody has really tapped into that. So that is really, I think, our next move is to take a look into that industry, which is largely antiquated and less competitive than hospitality.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think, one of my big takeaways from this entire conversation is that, speaking strictly as a hotel guy who's just started to get into the short-term rental space, there's been for a number of years now, and I've been in these meetings, sitting around these board tables, talking about whether or not this side of the industry is a threat, whether we need to pay attention to it. And I think maybe a little bit of hubris in thinking that as a hotel professional, there's no option for me in the short-term rental space. And what has been woven through this entire discussion for me is that there is absolutely room for somebody who's got a hotel background in
Absolutely.
the short-term rental space, and you can thrive in it. And a company like yours, do a little plug here, is absolutely a viable option, because you're going into an environment that's going to feel a lot more familiar than just running a home for a random owner. And that's going to
Yeah.
allow you to kind of keep the momentum going.
And in a lot of ways, this is already happening. So when we look at the cost cutting measures in travel and hospitality, they are all here to stay. Unfortunately for the guest, customers have been conditioned to pay the same and expect less. And you see this with Marriott. They eliminated daily housekeeping at a lot of their properties. Hilton had cuts to in-room dining. You even see it in airlines as well. It's really all of travel cutting back on premium cabin in-flight meals. So I think that's kind of been the trend, not just for travel and hospitality, but really anything. When consumers are conditioned to expect less, those cost cuts tend to be permanent. So for hotels, what that means is a lot of them are probably already operating like an Airbnb, where there isn't daily housekeeping and there isn't as extensive or labor intensive F&B. And they've already done the hardest thing. They control the real estate. They have the hotel permit. That's generally the largest barrier to entry. So what I think the opportunity is to say, hey, we have this brand. No one in short-term rentals has as ubiquitous or as storied of a brand as Marriott, and likely won't for a couple decades. So to me, they've already done the hard things. They just need to hire some general contractors or a company like ours and come in, take a floor plate and say, all right, instead of having 10, 2,000 or 200 square foot rooms here, we're going to make a bunch of super efficient studios that are maybe only 350 square feet. But the amount of lift and the longevity and the future of the product is, those pros are going to outweigh those upfront expenses.
Yeah, yeah. Andreas, I really appreciate you giving a look behind the curtain, what's going on over there, and maybe a little bit of foreshadowing of what's to come in the hotel business. But if anybody wants to learn more about you or Sextant Stays, where should they go?
They can go to our website, sextantstays.com. Sextant, like the navigational tool, and I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect there as well. Happy to chat.
Sounds good. I'll be linking to everything in the show notes if anybody wants to find it. Andreas, again, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for your time. Great catching up.